Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hopefully everyone's doing well today. Want to welcome you to our 13th annual Power and Diversity Leadership Conference. Truly delighted that you are here today. My name is John Brown, and I do work in the Office of Admissions here at St. Cloud State. And I'm just here, obviously I want to attend the conference, but I'm also here if you would happen to have any questions or concerns at any point about St. Cloud State, you can please let me know. Okay. But otherwise, I'm delighted to introduce our next session titled Cultivating Joy in Response to Collective Trauma, and definitely our presenter, Sydney Robinson. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Sydney.
Hello, friends. So as was mentioned, my presentation is Cultivating Joy in Response to Collective Trauma. This presentation describes the significant impact that COVID-19 had on students of color, especially during this pandemic, and will offer some creative means that will empower and invest in our student leaders considering today's context. We will focus on wellness, community care, and the importance of communities within communities. It's important to recognize some background about College St. Ben and St. John's University. We're private liberal arts colleges with a coordinate relationship located outside the St. Cloud area with about 3,000 students. They're both predominantly white institutions that follow the Catholic Benedictine tradition. Before we begin, I would like to read the land acknowledgement that was approved by our Indigenous Student Association last fall. Both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupied the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory whose connection remains today. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children, and now students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relations with our Native neighbors. So before we get started, it's important that you know who's actually speaking to you. So my name is Sydney Robinson. I use she, they pronouns interchangeably, and I graduated from the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in 2019. I got a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature with a concentration of creative writing, and currently I am pursuing my Master's of Science for Higher Education Administration. I was gonna go on a long spiel about state education if you're in there, but if any of you are interested in pursuing education, please continue. I know it's hard right now, but the students who are coming up are gonna need you, and especially people who look like you. Some of my involvement when I was at St. Ben's was a mass amount. I'm gonna highlight 3 really important ones. So the Student Senate, that was our student government center. I was our vice president who focused on women's leadership. Our Advocates for Inclusive Mentoring is our peer-to-peer mentoring program for marginalized students to build retention as well as sense of belonging. Cultural Affairs Board, I'll get a little bit more into that, but I was the co-chair and we did DEIJ as well as cultural agility training. And then the one that I want to spend a little bit more time on is Black Student Association. All of my involvement in one way or another focused on making the student experience great. Whether that was community building, whether that was building relationships, or just the idea of looking in the mirror and feeling good about being on the campus you're on. That was something that was really important to me as an out-of-state student. So like I said, I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. Coming to Minnesota was a wake-up call if I've ever heard of one. But because I'm in a rural area and at a residential college, I felt that out-of-state students were really not a part of the conversation, and that's not even thinking of what international students go to. So it was important for me to not only be at the table, but have a voice, and a powerful voice at the table. But with Black Student Association, my job was not to lead. My job was to show up. My job was to be authentically Black and in the room. And little Sydney needed that. I didn't want to be in charge of everything. I didn't want to coordinate. I just wanted to be in a room with other Black people who were dealing with the same kind of experience I would be in. You know, being in the room, being in community, being enough. That was what BSA was all about. And I'm gonna highlight the importance of community with the community as I go through this, but remembering that example of existing sometimes is what people need. So when we talk about collective trauma, really what is that? So it's a psychological reaction to a traumatic event that affects an entire society. It doesn't only represent the historical factor event, but it's our brain's process of trying to understand that memory. Thinking of the George Floyd murder, that video is stapled in my brain. And I swear it gets more and more intense, even though the video has never changed. But my recollection of it, I feel his pain because I have to continuously see it, continuously unable to unplug from Twitter. We had day by day, minute by minute updates during the trial. Even today, they are still doing trial things in regard to that murder. Also in our context, especially in Minnesota, the rise of violence towards AAPI communities, especially women. Black women and Asian women have been the highest targeted for crimes last year. When I say crimes, I do mean death. But their bodies have been harmed the most. And so that collective trauma of seeing people who look like you and visualizing people who look like you, what you're from, can cause that traumatic memory. And then obviously we're emerging from the pandemic, hopefully. So the loss of COVID-19. And we think of loss simply in the facts of someone passed away, which is important and totally valid. But there were other losses. Some of the students who are here didn't get prom. They didn't get their Sweet 16. They didn't get graduation. They didn't spend Ramadan or Christmas or any of these celebratory holidays together. Myself, my father passed, not related to COVID. Didn't get to say goodbye. We lost and we grieved in different movements. And that collective work that we did together, those multiple experiences of grief and loss, racial unrest, and increased identity-based violence, all these encounters have only intensified the collective trauma that BIPOC individuals face as they attempt to make sense of all of this. Now looking at this data, this is a recent report from the CDC talking about all-cause mortality rate between 2019 and 2018, specifically looking at socioeconomic characteristics and race and ethnicity. For accessibility reasons, the furthest to the left, which is a teal line, is non-Hispanic Black. The farthest to the second line, which is orange, is Hispanic. The red is non-Hispanic Other, and the blue is non-Hispanic White. If you identify as Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, any part of the BIPOC word, you are disproportionately being affected by COVID. No matter if you had the ability to work from home, whether you were uninsured or had insurance, whether your income was in the 40% percentile, you were being affected in one way or another. And that's not even considering the medical bias that comes with going to doctors and going to the medical field. This helps illustrate the massive toll that the pandemic has had on communities of color, even those with economic security. Blacks in the highest income category experience mortality increases 3 times larger than the poorest whites. Thinking in the context of higher education, the lowest age that this data represents is 19. That is a college freshman, that is a college sophomore. Some people in this room might be 19, you might have children or siblings or cousins who are 19. So looking at our context, it's important to recognize what those students are going to. So we're gonna look specifically at traditional undergrad students, so not considering those who came from community college or were transfers, but people who matriculated right after high school. So if we're thinking of those students specifically, and if you guys wanna get in pairs or in groups of 3, what are some unique characteristics and or challenges that the current cohort of undergraduate students are facing in pairs or groups?
Personally, I would say, yeah.
Yes.
Hello. Hey, David. John.
Very nice to meet you. I used to be good at this.
What are some things that you're facing?
Me?
I mean, you're a pretty cool.
Would be so from COVID as well, the transition. Not just from high school, but also to
I would say that like trying to actually like
path through
stay focused while in class on Zoom. Is there something that's like I've been like
Yeah, no, I
can't
hear
do it.
yeah I can't.
a lot,
put it to the
especially
side
last
and
year.
it's my
Students,
ASMR
and
to
it's
sleep.
pretty typical on
So
high
I
school
can't do
too.
online.
Sometimes
So
you
my
remote,
ASMR.
sometimes in person, sometimes you have to go back to
So
remote.
difficulty connecting and being able to focus.
I guess
Yeah.
That sort of in person or one-to-one interaction. That
Definitely
makes
a challenge.
sense.
Some folks can handle.
Also, I think it's just coping with the fact that we're in a pandemic and some people understand that we're in a pandemic and other people don't understand. And seeing that at our school we have in-person class
I know
and being
some of the
with those people that
students
don't understand that we're in a pandemic, it's very
during the pandemic.
hard.
Some folks, parents, lost jobs or lost their money.
I would say,
Depending on
I
their
don't teach
occupation,
undergrads,
so
I
that's
teach graduate students, but
definitely
one of the things
And
I like about just as a faculty member and walking around campus is how you all are able to connect to one
So that's
another, those
definitely
missed
wonderful.
sort of pivotal learning moments that aren't necessarily happening because you're going straight from class back to your residence hall or you're involved in your student groups, but not as much as you would have been if, you know, we were outside of a pandemic. And so that's something that I'm thinking about. I'm also wondering how folks are coping, been impacted by COVID, much to that previous slide, if you lost a parent or grandparent or someone else.
We're just discussing the
You know,
question on the board if you want to join the group.
All consuming sometimes, and it ebbs and flows, and it's up and down, and so there's no singular way for you to experience grief or you to navigate grief or a roadmap like the 10 steps or whatever, right? It doesn't always happen in a linear way. And so what does that mean for folks who need some support?
You know, there's also
Start thinking of some answers, pick someone to answer out loud.
the spread of COVID and stuff, you know, and,
If you're an undergrad, probably
we've seen
you.
that on our campus.
Staring at y'all.
Usually, it's their active campus, you know, pre-COVID, I mean, it's still active. but, you
So we
know,
say
it's not
class.
like it used to be. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just totally
the
different,
structure of
you know, even when it
being
comes, you know,
a college
activity,
student in that
all those
sense,
things, it's definitely different.
or like, for me personally, it would be like having a normal freshman
I know
year
on the,
and
high
first
school
semester
side of
of
things,
sophomore year, and then next thing you know,
students get
it's okay,
ready
we'll
to-
come back. I'm gonna leave all my stuff here,
they feel
and next
like
thing you know, we don't come back, and I had to go back to campus and pick all my stuff
about
up.
things,
And it's been like that ever
they
since.
feel like they're kind of alone in college campus.
Yeah, I've actually been wondering about
So we help them, you know, counselors.
folks
necessarily
who,
walk
I mean, what is this year,
And because
3,
of the COVID,
2,
a
3?
lot of them.
Three.
I have no concept of time anymore. But folks who finished high school never had a normal semester on campus, right? So you didn't get that traditional orientation experience and welcome to campus, and this is how we do
They don't
things,
attend those very
opening
well.
parties or any of those.
All right, let's try to turn these conversations out
You don't know if
loud.
there's an end in sight.
Is anyone itching to answer
So what
or
happened?
to discuss what their group talked about?
Everything sucks. No, I'm kidding.
I know your names, I'll call on you.
Well, our group talked about how hard it was to learn, I don't know what you talked about before, but, learn in person versus online.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I joined the group, I mentioned that I work with high school students, that we saw students that were okay academically started to fail when it came to distance learning. And then students who were struggling academically were now doing a little bit better. So it was like that disconnect between the learning, how they were learning, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the methods of delivery.
Yeah.
Any other groups want to touch in?
We talked about like, we also touched on like how like it's kind of a challenge to, like we're both undergrad students, so like going through like Zoom and then like actually staying focused on the class and staying engaged while like you could literally have like your video off and then just use it to like sleep, that we were saying. And then like,
It's okay, be honest.
yeah, so I think that's what, and then we also touched on like the student life, like you go to class and then you go back to your room, like that's like the norm now, so it's like, we talked about that too.
And our group in the middle?
We did spend a fair amount of time talking about, you know, the different delivery methods and the impact it's had. You know, we talked about with high school students, many of them that classes have been almost exclusively online, and you know, they feel like they're alone, they don't have anybody to help them with the college planning process, and preparing for college. You know, we talked about campus environments, you know, about, you know, students not engaged, I guess you say, in college, in student activities and events as they have been in the past. Let's see guys, help me out here, I'm sure I missed.
You guys are right on the money, so you don't have to add more.
Maybe I did cover it all, I'm not sure, but those are things that we talked about.
Yeah, all of those are wonderful and correct answers. As we talk about the current cohort, let's talk about this makeup. How many of us are undergrads? Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for being here, taking a step to come to a conference. Who's here in grad school? I know I am. Hello, welcome in. And who's just a professional educator? The rounds. Lovely. So we're all gonna learn to take something home at least by the end of this, no matter what your undergrad level is. The creative means aren't just for the students, and it's not just for those in support staff or in professor roles. It's the ways that you can reflect both on your inner things to work with your students. So you guys pretty much, excuse me, not use you guys, you all. Y'all, yes, have been right on the money. So first, The 2019 to 2020 school year ended abruptly in March in the middle of spring break with uncertainty and some blissful optimism about coming back. Our current seniors, so the graduating class this year, are the only students who have had an uninterrupted college year. They're the only ones who actually know what college in its natural and wonderful form looks like. Them, including the rest of that cohort, have approximately 1 year of virtual learning, as well as additional hybrid, and kind of going that delivery method that you mentioned before, that inconsistency of, well, in Zoom, or I'm isolating, or my professor's isolating. There's just so much uncertainty that students don't have the ability to prepare properly for the next day, let alone the next class. That loss of regular and traditional club events, I'm a product of a liberal arts college. I think liberal arts are amazing. The point of a liberal arts college is not just the education you learn in the classroom, but that outside learning. Our students lost workshops. They lost national speakers. They lost resume review. They lost social events. They lost so many different outside areas where they're allowed to be social and invigorated and engulfed into the campus, that they are really losing half that experience. And if you think about it, 2/3, because that educational experience is also online. And then there's clubs, because there aren't any events. Clubs' pride are being able to do social and come together in community. And because we've had capacities on events or just a cap on events and altogether, clubs have become weak or altogether just inactive. And clubs becoming inactive has harmed campuses we've seen at a large rate, because then we've lost that natural development for leaders. By that I mean we've lost the ability to successfully transition in new leaders into this role. We've seen with clubs that there is this kind of shadowing that happens beforehand when they transition. So a student becomes a part of a club, they're a member, they get more and more invested, ask for responsibility, start taking on more responsibility, and then grow into that role. For our campus, March is when everything happens. We have Women's Month, we have our quinceañera, we have our archipelago gala. Depending on the year, we might have our Black Excellence gala. There are so many things that happen in the middle of spring that our students were not only able not to plan their events, but some of these students have never even experienced these events to plan them. They haven't had a quinceañera since I graduated there, and that was way back then. But part of those club structures being gone, we're increasing the leadership gap that we're seeing. It's not just happening in BIPOC communities, but we are losing students, but we're not losing the amount of leadership roles out there. So we need to do something and find a creative means to get those club structures, as well as those community building things back in place. So now that we've addressed the current context, it's time that we adapt. The part of this conference is resilience and reinvention. The way that we adapted, the way that we reinvented, is by redefining our priorities. And the number one for that was community care versus self-care. Who in this room has ever been to a self-care workshop, saw something that told you how to do self-care, or just been told when you were stressed, go to counseling, go take a bubble bath? And that's great. Don't get me wrong, self-care is wonderful. But we're talking about collective trauma, and that is something you do within your group and within your community. You are not gonna bubble bath yourself out of racism. You are not gonna counseling yourself out of microaggressions. You are not going to write or read or self-care your way into healing. That is a communal thing that you do with those you trust and those who've shared experiences, which is why we're highlighting community care. And part of community care is just existing. That's where we come into the idea of setting realistic expectations. One of those expectations is these clubs are not at full capacity in the same way they used to be. They probably don't have a full team. They probably don't even know there's others like them. I mentioned our Indigenous Student Association earlier. The only reason that exists is because we had a faculty member pull them all together and said, you are not alone. Look at this other group of students here. I was speaking with one of my students earlier about a Muslim Student Association and the importance of gathering them together, even if it's only for a year and it's not gonna last as long as you think it is. Just getting them together, getting them in the room, having them feel seen, sometimes is enough. Our students don't need massive speakers, they don't need these huge programming events, they need each other. And so for us who are in those professional capacities, it is on us to create environments, to set time and dedicate environments to make sure that our students are set up to be in community with each other. But that also goes into the idea of acknowledging limitations. We are all at different capacities and different availabilities than we were in the pandemic. Some of us have added on different responsibilities, whether that's at home or in our personal lives, or if that's just on the campus because of understaffing, a lot of us are having to put on different hats. So acknowledging that you cannot give in the same way you used to give your full self. Students are also in that same boat of their capacities are not enough. Some of them are just trying to get to the end of the day. Some of those are just trying to turn that test in, close their campus links, and be done. And I get that. Sometimes just doing the extra and hurting yourself is too much. And we understand that we need to make sure that we tell students being you and being authentic is sometimes just enough, and that's all we expect from them. I will go a little bit into prioritizing and cultivating joy on the next slide, but the way that our example of redefining those priorities was by reestablishing the Cultural Affairs Board. So the Cultural Affairs Board, when I was a student, was a cultural agility focused club on campus that was volunteer time, so all of the students who were involved chose to be part of this. They didn't necessarily fit one identity or another, they were just students who wanted to become intercultural leaders. I served as a co-chair, and part of my job was really just making sure students were aware of leadership roles. It was very vague in the type of leadership that was done, but it fit the time. We had cultural clubs who were focusing on the social aspects, who were focusing on the community building, we're doing those wide events, that the Cultural Affairs Board really could focus on those individual development things. They did Tune In Tuesdays, which is a specific programming effort to address different topics on campus or around the world. I remember one of the big one is when Colin Kaepernick started kneeling, talking about kneeling to the flag and what the importance of the Pledge of Allegiance really was. They also released statements, so when DACA happened, they released a statement to our school to make sure that we protected our students. They really were an advocacy-based group. But being an advocacy-based group, they did not address clubs. They didn't help clubs build their board makeup, nor did they really do anything outside of their social spheres. But that was the need then. Now, we've gone from 15 cultural clubs to maybe 4. And that's not even representing the entire diaspora of what our campus has. Our biggest clubs right now are Exploring Latin American Cultures, which is our ELAC, our Black Student Association, our African Student Association, and our Archipelago Association, which kind of work under one bubble for Black identity, and then our Hmong American Involving Student Association, which is for our Hmong students on our campus. And then as the Indigenous Association, as I offered before. That's it. And so instead of trying to think, oh, we need to get back up to 15, we need to take care of those 4 to 5 clubs that are here and make sure they're strong before we try to start anything new. And that's where Cultural Affairs Club came in. So we spent all last spring revamping and trying to see where the holes were in the club. Where was it that students felt they needed more support? Where was it that they needed more administrative on their side? So part of that reinvention was, instead of there being volunteer time, we have 2 paid co-chairs. Part of us having those 2 paid co-chairs, they have office hours in our multicultural center, they have access to multicultural center resources, as well as our entire staff, on top of having a budget. And I know that might not seem like a lot, but for students who want to do these great things, the way our campus is set up, you have to practically do a budget report, all of these extra hoops to jump through that students that we work for. The achievement gap did not teach them that. They missed that lesson, or more likely they were excluded from that lesson. So Cultural Affairs Board is going to come in and spend that time to teach them how to budget, to teach them how to bring these program efforts in, to teach them how to do basic social media, forms, Excel, anything to help them build back their brand better is what we want to focus on. Part of their work is they meet bi-weekly with their larger group. The makeup went from volunteers to actually being representatives from the cultural clubs. So we have 1 member from all of our cultural clubs on that board, so that they are always in knowledge of not only what's going on in our center, but so that the center is acknowledging what they are doing and we can apply that to our work. We are only as strong as our students, and if our students don't feel like their voice is strong, then we didn't do our job. So part of that community care, part of that our mission is to make sure that they know they have a resource. They know where we are, and they know they have a space that's for them and safe for them. The administrative report is one of the bigger things that we want to highlight. So previously, like I said, it was just volunteer time with an advisor who may or may not have been in the capacity to be as they needed, but that's how all the clubs were. You just picked someone who you thought you could relate to or might have fit the demographic of your club, and that was that. Versus now, the Cultural Affairs would have people who do DIJ work. They have the entire backing of our senates, of our multicultural center, of our student development. They know that they have the support, and that has given them the confidence to do so many different types of events, or at least events, socials and outreach to make sure that students know what's going on. Part of that sense of community and belonging involved them. They send weekly outreach emails that's updating them about what's going on campus, the different resource opportunities. They found out about this conference like 2 weeks ago, so they have heads up before any events happen on campus, first dibs. Like, we really, really try to make sure that they feel supported so that they can create the situations they need. It's not on us to say, you need to do this event, this event, this event. Our job is to go, how can I support you in your goals? How can I make this room more welcoming? How can I make this more accessible? That is what our job is. So that sense of belonging and that sense of community is part of that environment building. Setting that expectation of just come together and meet. Because those first years, that's important to them. Those seniors leaving, that's important to them. Especially those sophomores who are really being treated as if they're normal, but they're basically first years again because they didn't have a normal year either. Every part of campus is stronger because of the communities that they have and the sense of belonging they have. And that right there, the Culture Affairs Board has set that expectation of you're in the room and we see you. So part of us adapting is cultivating joy. A big part of our office before the transition, our student employees did the bear of all the DEIJ work. They were in charge of professional development as well as student development. So now we are trying to adapt that by cultivating joy and allowing our students to participate in the joy that they're creating. So Shante Joseph's quote, where society has told Black people to be quiet or that we are too loud, reveling in joy is an act of resistance. As our feeds become even more inundated with images of trauma, joy can help us too. So looking at your groups, you can get back in your groups again. For the first question, what are some moments in your collegiate career that you've experienced joy? You guys get back in your groups, it's great.
I'd say like probably the open house of the multicultural center, and we have a CD code where
Yeah.
I'm for meetings, so.
it's a Q plus, it's like a LGBTQI plus
Cultivating joy.
organization that like is within like the multicultural center. They hosted like a BB queer national coming out day, and I think that was like something that was like that made me feel like seen and heard too.
We're accepting that this is our.
I think, and also it was the opener for our festival lectures, because it was, now we present it as a week-long over in a day. So after not having festival closures and now bringing it back and opening it with Beauty Queer, which had bubbles, had flags, all this, and many people in food. It was like a very joyful, not just for like the multicultural center and the open festival, but it's just as the campus as a whole, not being able to gather, but now being able to gather outside, feel this like pride, especially for LGBTQ plus students, feeling of having a place to
it's
live
not one I talk about things that
being
we're trying to get
told.
students back together. It's pretty finding out new markets.
I mean, I went to college, I didn't even know, so I'm thinking about what brings me joy.
So it's talking about keeping students energized and avoiding
For me,
burnout
it's having
and allowing them
those
to
interactions with students like this, like I just randomly end up in a group.
So we're not even saying a
I
burnout.
would need to see that sort of like
What I'm doing right now is
it's
like,
like every day, and I tell people all the time, you know, I know what it means to have an effort and to have all this education, is I know a whole lot about a specific amount of stuff, but I don't know everything, and so there's still opportunities to learn and grow. And I like that.
It was probably 99.
For me personally, for the first question, I guess it would be meeting new people, because I feel myself more of an introvert rather than an extrovert, like, in the middle, but towards the introverted. So sometimes it's harder for me to meet with new people, but freshman year, like, I became friends with a really good person by playing Uno on the phone with them. And now, like, they no longer go to campus, but I'm still able to, like, go visit them in Houston. So it's, I think, creating those, like,
This campus I'm talking about is St. Vincent St. John's,
brought a
which
lot of
is
joy to me. Cause like,
about
I
20
feel like
minutes
in high school
away,
we
but
have
still
all these
through the
campus
same
and then a lot of them listen
geographic
here.
reach of students.
But here we're all like growing and then we can connect with
Oh,
them.
okay.
We build our connections and see like how we each are growing
I think it's
and
just-
end up like with
Thank you.
all
There's a lot of
Yeah.
times,
People are
yeah,
just-
thank you, everybody,
Realizing
live in
Yeah.
they can
Mall.
advocate for
And
themselves.
so when we were back in Wisconsin, we
Right now.
visited there
And
all
so
the
they're
time.
not
I'm
saying
used to Mankato,
And I love that.
a big city around there, so we spent
Like,
a
especially
lot
the
of
girls who are
time.
learning to advocate for themselves.
Hey,
It just feels like
people
something
that
I shouldn't do. I shouldn't do it.
like I
It sucks
told
right
her,
now,
like,
really good.
that bring me
Oh, no,
joy.
I'm sorry, I should have told, I work in the admissions
Alright,
office.
once everyone's had a chance to share, give me a thumbs up.
That's like
Oh, we were like-
I love it.
I've been here now.
Like, I don't know if that's allowed.
It's okay.
And I've been fortunate to work here at I'd say for 15 years.
All right, friends, let's circle back. What are some moments in your collegiate career, whether as a professional or as a student, what are some ways that you experienced joy?
I can go.
Yeah.
So I'm a part of the Mom Student organization here, and last year it was really rough, you know, with COVID and stuff. There was a lack of engagement, but coming into this new year, it's great to see more students in my community coming out and just rejoicing with each other.
And people knowing more than just mom's a small country.
Yes.
So I'm gonna just unpack that a little bit. What about that brought you joy?
I think it was just like from the past year, just the lack of engagement and seeing like students from my own background,
Mhm.
and then finally being able to have a sense of community and family there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
That's a community of family. I like that. Anyone else like to share? Yeah.
So I guess like for me, I'm a statewide leader.
Okay.
And so one of the things I noticed in the pandemic was like a lot of things shut down. Like even like my own clubs when I was a campus leader, I had to shut them down because nobody was joining.
Yeah.
And I built those clubs pre-pandemic. And so it was, so now seeing more people engaged, like going to campuses, talking with students, like seeing clubs being rebuilt, seeing that support coming back has been so reinvigorating. Because it means that that support that I had my first year of college is what people are finally going to be able to get, hopefully this and the upcoming years.
I like those words, reinvigorating, support. Let me get two more joyful stories. Where did we experience some joy? It's not one of those hard questions like, tell me about yourself. It's what made you happy?
I work at Central Lakes College, which is an hour north of here,
Uh-huh.
and we just opened our multicultural center.
Congrats.
But we want to stray away from that name because in that area brings up a lot of issues or conversations that we want to stray away from because it gets away from the point of having the center. So it's called the Nest to go along with the theme of like the sports because we have our mascot is a bird or whatever. Anyway.
Sorry, I'm making a note because I'm gonna come back to that later.
Okay. So that was built out of a need for something else and it just turned into that. And then we have I'm just proud of that because it was talked about for like 10 years about having something in that capacity on campus. So because of the pandemic and Joy Floyd, that whole thing coming together, or it came together because based on that and the need for a barber shop. So I work with the student athletes there, and every year I held a sports camp for them to get them acclimated to the town and just a point person for resources for them. And all the students that would come year after year would ask me about a barber shop and someone to cut their hair. And I always told them to come to St. Cloud. But I wanted to like bridge that gap, so I got a barber to come on campus. And based on having a barber come to campus, the area that you put the barber shop, the initiative for the multicultural center is built.
Is that barber like physically there?
Yes, he goes there, well, it's based on appointment, so there's flyers posted up around the college that students can call him and then set up an appointment with him. And he comes, I guess, at first it was once a week, but now we're going to twice a week because more people are catching the end of it. And then we opened it up to the community as well. So then people in the community are coming and getting haircuts from him as well.
That's wonderful. I'm sorry, like, we're having conversations at our campus about having a barber shop or someone who knows how to do like braids or any kind of hairstyle. So that's wonderful that you guys have that.
Yeah,
That brings me joy.
I'm bringing, that's the next step is for this to catch on so we can have like a female, like kind of like a boat atmosphere where
Yeah.
women can get their hair done. And
Yeah, we should
there's
think
a lot
about
of
it.
different populations move into that area and they have to travel back this way to get anything done.
That's really smart. And that's tapping into the need of the community now, not
Yeah.
just for the future, but now.
Yes.
In this front row, thank you for that and thank you for sharing. Our current college people, if you want to talk about what I'm going to talk about next, you're more than welcome to. Jeff will see. If you want to say that, you can.
Yeah, kind of. So we mentioned BB queer, and especially like the picture with Michael there. I feel like that brought a lot to our center. It was the opening for Festival of Cultures, and also it was on Coming Out Day, which I'm pretty sure, right? It was and it was like the opening event where we were able to gather, like kind of for the first time. And like as you see in the picture, there it's like we're hugging each other, we're physically together, and there was bubbles and everything. And it was like our inner child was like like so. It was a very joyful moment for all of us and for the Multicultural Center, for the Q+ organization.
So what I'm hearing is what we need to cultivate joy is the space, the people, and the support. Sound about right? So since you mentioned Michael, I'm going to actually use Michael's quote. Michael is one of our student employees, our first-gen coordinator that is currently in London living their best life studying abroad. And I'm going to talk about a program that we work on at our campus called Festival of Cultures. And Michael has been part of our office for 4 years and said this has been the least stressful experience of working for Festival of Cultures in my entire 4 years. We only had 3 years, but their entire 4 years. And once you hear how I explain how much was added to it, you're gonna be shocked to know that quote. So on the left hand is from 2015, that was my first year of college. And Festival of Cultures is a day celebration of culture, specifically looking at ethnicity and like global countries. There is cultural food tasting with some of our international students who actually give their lived experience behind a booth. We have cultural performances, so our high students, they do one of their traditional Hmong dances. We have Irish Dance Club, our archipelago. We have a huge population of Bohemians who bring Carnival to the end. We just got a Japanese Bunka Club who did amazing. I'll show you their picture in just a bit. But it was one of the biggest points on our community where we saw there are other people who look like us. There are other people who dance like us, sing like us, celebrate like us, eat like us. It was a big moment, but on the flip side of that, the students were solely responsible for this. The students arranged all the performers, which were also students coming back from summer. They were in charge of getting the vendors, all the outside people, coordinating with admissions for prospective students to come in. Every single detail was looked out by a student, which means if you were working, you were not participating. A lot of our students comment about watching behind the curtain because they were so busy running logistics, running that management side of things, that they felt that they didn't get to actually experience it. Some of our students don't actually know what those dances were because they were working the event. And so we wanted to adapt to that. During the COVID year, we didn't have it. And so myself and my director were recently hired. And so we decided, what way can we make this celebrate the culture that it already did, but make it in a way that everyone can experience it. So part of that you'll see is that we changed it from a day event to a week-long event. Part of that week-long event was highlighting various definitions of culture, becoming a campus-wide effort, and allowing students to pick and choose what events they wanted to program. I'm gonna highlight 4 very specific ones. So as Deanna said, BB Queer. We held that with our Queer Plus team, that is Queer Proud Lavender Union for Students. They represent all of our Q plus community, and on National Coming Out Day, we had a barbecue outside of our multicultural center. It started with a pride walk from the center of campus with posters, and there's about 15 to 20 students, I believe, that led the walk. And all of our student employees, because they're nodding, were clapping and celebrating them as they came to the center. We had a live DJ, music inside our center, movies playing music loud, and it was a moment for us to come together in community. Whether students are part of the LGBT community or not, they were there, and they were there to support each other. Next is Green Card Voices. We celebrated the green card holders on our campus, so we had students as well as some faculty who gave their stories, as well as working with Green Card Voices in St. Cloud to have some of their visual imagery, because we wanted to make sure that, say a student wasn't able to go to the event, they can still experience the stories and hear the message that they were supposed to get. And that was a really important part of our reinvention, is it's not just the event. There needs to be follow through, and there needs to be visual representations of culture. We had little flags with all of the countries as well as queer identities displayed all throughout our outside as well as our inside. Our Instagram and Facebook had takeovers to make sure that we were highlighting the international student experience. We had, who am I forgetting? One of our Bahamian students took us to actually dance practice to see them get ready for their performance. And it was just a moment that was something that was completely new, but literally no money. All we had to do was set up a table and buy and get the students ready. Low-cal, and it was one of the, not low-cal, excuse me, low energy, and it was one of our biggest events. Something new that out of a whim, we said we want to celebrate our students. And I'm just gonna celebrate them because the two students who were part of it are here. But that was a moment that they got to hear the real life stories of people that they interact with every single day. Back to Mai Bang on Tuesday. So she is a Great Wolf Press author who wrote a book called Yellow Fever that specifically talks about her experience as a Hmong woman and her family's journey from Laos to America, specifically Minnesota. And that was something the English department was already doing. But for us, we're respecting culture, we're adapting, we're reinventing, we're finding new ways to get communities connected. So we worked with the English department to get, was it about 15 to 20 books for our Hmong students, and they got an hour dedicated with her. We didn't set a schedule, we didn't set an agenda, we said, this is your time as Hmong students to be with an accomplished Hmong person, to just be, exist, ask what you need to ask. And it ended up being about 2 to 3 hours of them just commiserating together and being in community. And sometimes that's just enough. All we did was create the space and give them the time to do it. All they had to do was show up. You'll see this trend. And then lastly, I wanna highlight our student showcase, and that's really where the idea of reinvention came from. So that was always part of our first festival cultures, but that was the day-long event. Instead, we saved it for the nighttime and added or incorporated the fashion show, which was students being in their traditional regalia, or in any kind of wardrobe or attire that helps them represent their culture, and kept it in our, instead of having it in our field house, which is just like the volleyball gym, we put it into our huge Stephen B. Humphreys theater. It was official, there were ticket scannings, it felt like their time was valued, their performance were valued. It was an official event that was open and free to the community. And I will put it out there that it always is in case you guys are interested in coming next year. But it was a moment that these students felt, oh, my performance is a big deal. Like, this is actually official, this is something. We cultivated that joy by getting them that space. All they had to do was show up. And so part of that process of adapting to current needs was setting the expectation that things do not need to be student-led, they need to be student-focused. Students need to be at the center of the work that we are doing continuously. And part of that student focus is we need to advocate and teach our students to let us know when they're at their capacity, to let us know when it's too much, to let us know when, you know what, I want to do this, but I can't right now. I would love to help, I would love my input, but I can't be the sole person. We have to recognize that everything we do is for them, and therefore they are not the means to our end, we are their resource. Part of this readaptation was recognizing the various representation on campus. As I mentioned before, it was very based in race and your global identity, but we wanted to make sure that we highlighted Indigenous folks. We highlighted people's gender and sexuality. We highlighted people's citizenship status. We highlighted religion. One of the coolest things I think we did was we had a Spanish mass, and if I can go back to the picture, oh, just kidding. We had a Spanish mass that had all of the flags we have represented on our campus. Any student that we have on our campus has a flag. and we marched from our Sacred Heart Chapel to our center of campus Gretzky Dining Center, proudly holding our flags, marching to our music. And there's something powerful in just the visual of seeing people authentically living and being themselves. And we did get a lot of praise for this new format, especially as I mentioned Michael's quote, but our students really felt that they were not just responsible for creating the joy, but they had the opportunity to participate in the joy. As a student manager, I'm very, very stickly about if you get it done in advance, you get to enjoy it. You don't have to be planning during the event if you do everything you were supposed to do ahead of time. And on top of that, if you tell us ahead of time that it's too much, then we can step in and make sure that these things still happen. We want to make sure that even if they're in person, through Zoom, hybrid style, students are able to find and feel centered in the work that we're doing. And so I'm going to go back to that nesting imagery. The environment you're in matters. If you are a flower surrounded by weeds, that is killing your garden. If you are not in the right kind of sunlight, you're killing your garden. If you're on a weak branch, your nest will fall. You will not be able to support the birds. So let's think just a little bit of reflecting on as you leave today. You can take a screenshot, but how will you cultivate joy in your life? How will you water your garden? What are the weeds and different, what's the word I'm looking for? Mosquitoes and parasites that need to be removed to allow you to grow? What type of joy, what type of people, what type of things are you going to allow to let shine down on you? But I also want you to consider what's stopping you from experiencing joy. What needs to be removed or deprioritized from your life to allow you to grow, to allow your space to be the space you need to be successful and loved and included? So I just want to summarize kind of all that idea of resilience and reinvention, that prioritizing not only cultural clubs, but those communities of culture, those communities of color, in order to build back those historically excluded populations, we need to let them know that they have each other. We need to get them connected to not only their communities, but the resources that support those communities just as much. We need to create spaces of joy to battle racial battle fatigue, to battle sexism, to give students the tools they need to advocate for themselves. We need to build and maintain community as higher ed professionals and make sure that we are taking that responsibility off their students' hands. They are here so that we can enrich them, and we need to make that our priority as well. Thank you. I'm open to any and all questions, if there are any, or if people want to share maybe their answers to how they'll cultivate joy.
I would say I'm going to revamp your festival of culture. Have that come out of the nest at my organization.
You should, it's so great.
There's a lot of notes, trust me. I have a lot of ideas.
I have my card too if any of you guys would like to connect after this to get more information. I am only entry level, but I would love to get some more connections and get some more students in the best hands as possible.
I just want to say thanks for sharing. So it's always nice to hear what's happening on other campuses, how you're facilitating student support and what that looks like. It's also nice to go to a session that's about culture, that's not about sadness, that's not about heartbreak, that's not about, is about how students experience racism, but isn't talking about or sort of re-centering that trauma, but instead focused on what do we do when we are combating that or supporting one another through that. I think is really important because far too often when we're doing this work of social justice and equity, we're focusing on everything that's wrong and not the things that bring us power, that bring us joy, and that can give us the energy to keep the fight going, because this is an ongoing journey. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint, so thank you.
Yeah, and just to highlight that, working with our student teams of it's always responding to things, we're making sure that we're working with students on if you are comfortable responding, and if you're not, making sure that they have both those avenues. We did a racial battle fatigue about why you respond and why you don't respond, to make sure that they were being applied with these tools as well, not just we're recognizing professionals, but how they can recognize those things in themselves too.
Absolutely.
Because it's gonna happen. Like, a lot of us are visible minorities. microaggressions, micro insults, all of those are gonna happen in our lives, but we can also find each other just as much. Yeah, if you guys don't have anything else, I won't take too much of your time.
Thank
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.